Welcome back to this edition of Illinois Law. This evening we're discussing violence against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex persons. My guests are Assistant State's Attorney Daniel Kirk and attorneys Anthony Rothert and Jennifer Shaw. We were discussing orders of protection. What can an order of protection actually cover?
An order of protection will prevent the abuser from coming within a certain number of feet of the protected individual. The protected individual's family, if they're included in the order of protection, will keep them coming from that person's home, school, their children's school, from their place of employment. Will protect them from further harassment, abuse. It can also provide for child support, maintenance, counseling expenses, attorney's fees. It can require someone to turn over their weapons to the sheriff's department. There are a large number of remedies that are fashioned under the Illinois Domestic Violence Act that can be included in an order of protection.
There certainly seems to be. What about enforcement of an order of protection? What about that, Tony? How does that happen?
Well, a violation of an order of protection is a crime. And
another separate crime?
It's a separate crime, and you know, the first offense is a misdemeanor, but the second offense after a conviction can be a felony, so it can become a serious crime very quickly. And what an order of protection does is it makes abuse and harassment a crime that may not itself be a crime. You don't have to hit someone who has an order of protection against you to be arrested. You can just harass them or come too close to them.
Or visit their place of employment if that was a condition.
Yes.
Or fail to pay child support if you were ordered to pay child support.
Right.
Or not return a child at the time that visitation was to end, if visitation was one of the tenets of the order of protection.
Certainly, any of those things that were, especially if they're done for the purpose of harassing the individual who has the order of protection, could become a crime.
So then the police would go out and arrest that person? Dan?
Yes, yes. And that happens quite often, violations of order of protection. There are actually 18 different remedies that can be included in a standard order of protection, depending on what the judge wants to impose in that particular instance. And any violation of that order is prosecutable by my office, by any state's attorney's office throughout Illinois.
In fact, I think 18 is 3 blank lines, so you can just fill in whatever you need for the particular relationship.
Absolutely.
Let's turn now to hate crimes and talk about that a little bit. Has there always been such a category in Illinois, Dan?
No. The Illinois legislature in 1991 created the crime of a hate crime, and then further amended the act in 1995 to create enhanced sentencing provisions if a crime is deemed to be a hate crime. So generally speaking, it's existed since the early 90s.
And the definition of a hate crime has this language, actual or perceived. How does that further define what may have occurred in a hate crime situation?
It's a great question, and it's an important point to make, that it doesn't have to be actual. The person who's the victim of the crime doesn't actually have to be gay, for example. It's dependent on what the offender perceived them to be. So perhaps the offender perceived them to be gay, and then they were motivated by an animus toward gay people to commit the crime against that person, but in fact the victim was not in fact gay. That still fits within the provisions of the statute.
And in fact, it does cover quite a few categories, not just sexual orientation. What are some of the other categories?
There's 10 categories to be exact, and they cover other things that are probably common knowledge. Race, color, creed, religion, national origin, disability, and certainly sexual orientation. I'm sure I left a few out.
And gender, too.
And gender as well. And gender as well. But sexual orientation is certainly part of the statute, and one of the classifications included in it.
So, Tony, if we hear that there's some incident of gay bashing, that is something that is prosecutable as a hate crime?
It can be if there's some evidence to show that the motivation for the crime was hatred of a group, was animus toward gay people.
Well, how would that occur? Because a hate crime isn't just the crime of battery.
Right.
It's something plus a crime.
Right. It can there can be evidence of what someone said before they committed the crime, perhaps you know, the reason why they went and committed the crime. If
Some
there's
kind of admission?
some kind of admission, or you know, speech, what was said as they were beating someone up, can show what their state of mind was.
And another important point to make on that is that it doesn't have to be the sole motivating factor. It can be just one of a number of motivating factors that motivated the offender to commit the crime. In other words, perhaps the offender started the beating because they were just angry at the person, but then during the course of the beating somehow began to perceive that the person was gay, and then the beating escalated because of it. And we have evidence to show, to demonstrate what the motivation was. That fits into it as well. It doesn't have to be the sole motivation. It just has to be one of the motivations that we can prove.
So it could almost evolve during the course of a crime then?
Absolutely.
And what are these other crimes, or at least an example of some of these other crimes that come under this umbrella of hate crime?
Certainly battery is one of them. Criminal trespass to residence is another one. Criminal trespass to vehicle, aggravated assault, and a number of other crimes fit into the hate crime statute.
Now, when there's been when you perceive that you've been the victim of a hate crime, what's the first thing you need to do?
The first thing you need to do is call the police. You've been the victim of a crime and you need to call the police. And when you make that call, you need to say, I believe I've been a victim of a hate crime. You need to identify that this is a facet of the crime, and making sure that you see if there are witnesses around, getting their names, getting telephone numbers, taking pictures, like Tony said before. If there's been physical violence, taking pictures of your injuries, not just after it happens, but the day after, 2 days after, bruises develop over time.
And what about, Dan mentioned that we, you know, and Tony both mentioned that sometimes things are said during the course of the crime. You know, maybe you've been hit in the head so bad you may have been rendered unconscious, and something might come to you a day after the crime, or 2 days after something comes back to you. What should you do when you remember something that's been said?
You need to document and keep notes for yourself as to what happened, any set of facts that you remember, and also to follow up with with the police department. If the state's attorney's office is involved, to follow up with the victim witness coordinator, making sure that you tell people so that they remember when you are preparing to testify, so that people are able to jog your memory.
In fact, you can make, I think, what's called a supplemental report to a police report. Might that be a good idea in a situation like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing that people should be aware of, too, is that if they truly believe that they've been a victim of a hate crime, and they're aware of evidence that they can present to law enforcement authorities, if they go to the police and they don't get satisfaction with the police, don't stop there. Call, you know, if it happens in Chicago, if it happens in Cook County, call the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Let us know. We're the ones that are going to make the charging decision on the case. And we've seen instances where something was missed at that first level with the police, but it was caught at our level because, of course, we're likely to be more familiar. We better be more familiar with the law than the police officers. As prosecutors, we better be. So don't stop there. Call our office. Go to our website, www.statesattorney.org. There's instructions there. There's ways to contact us and let us know. And certainly we'll take a good, close look at it.
In fact, when you're dealing with an order of domestic violence situation or a hate crime situation, the police, you brought up our police department, they are specially trained to recognize both hate crimes and domestic violence, are they not?
They are, and as a matter of fact, the Chicago Police Department has a civil rights section where these officers who are responsible for investigating these instances are specially trained on these issues, on civil rights issues.
And in fact, they have to do certain things when they respond to a call of domestic violence. And I would
Certainly.
imagine when there's an allegation of a hate crime, there's certain things they need to do too.
Absolutely. But, you know, nothing's perfect. And so because of that, we have safeguards in place to ensure that things, that it's very unlikely that things will fall through the cracks, which is why I urge people to call our office, to call the Cook County State's Attorney's Office if they haven't gotten the satisfaction or what they believe to be justice just from the police department.
Well, what if the criminal, there is a hate crime charge and the criminal trial isn't successful? Is there any civil remedy?
Yeah, the Illinois statute actually allows for a civil remedy whether or not there is a criminal case, whether a prosecution is ever initiated, regardless of how the criminal prosecution turns out. An individual who was the victim of a hate crime can sue, and they can sue for reasonable and fair attorney's fees and for even punitive damages. So it's something important for people to know.
All right, so they can get money damages if they don't want to go through the criminal process, frankly.
Absolutely.
I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening for this edition of Illinois Law. And thanks to my guests, Assistant State's Attorney Daniel Clerk, Anthony Rothert, and Jennifer Shaw, for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us. Please join us next week for our next edition of Illinois Law.